Oh man, I've been really excited for this one. Today, I'll be giving a breakdown of my experience with the Atari 2600, as someone who's played it off and on since the age of 5. As I was born in the 90s, obviously I didn't live through the initial 2600 hype, so I will probably miss out on some context that people at the time would have considered important. I still think that my perspective, entirely removed from all that, could be interesting to a lot of people. Ultimately, this will focus on what I've learned and what I think would be helpful for others to know. I'll also be taking a brief look at every game I currently own in my collection. I've occasionally added, and removed from it over the years. What's with me today are the games I consider timeless classics, and I can't wait to share them all with you. But before that, let's talk about collecting for it. First and foremost, the Atari 2600 turns 50 years old at the end of 2027. Fun fact, it was released the same year as VHS in the United States. And that's a more relatable example here, so tell me, how often do you see the earliest VHS prints in good shape? Yeah, it's the exception. You can pretty much expect the same for 2600 cartridges. A lot of the damage they've suffered sadly isn't from their use, but rather the way they've been stored. They could be falling all over the place, tucked away with random knickknacks like silverware or hardly working toasters. This isn't uncommon to find at certain resale stores. Me and my dad, in the past, we kept them in a shoebox, and I've since met others who did the exact same thing. While it's not the best storage method, it is much better than the norm. If you want to collect only good quality 2600 cartridges, your best bet is finding a local place that actually cares about storing them efficiently. You can also use websites like eBay, and that does let you be more choosy. However, as a Canadian, most listings are in the US, and the shipping charges right now are rarely worth it. I don't mind because it forces me to go out and look for them, which is a lot more fun. In any case, do consider how many hands these cartridges have gone through over the last 50 years. Does that make great condition cartridges expensive? Honestly, you would think so, but for games that aren't particularly rare, I usually find them being sold at the same price. Like Yars Revenge, for example. I got both of these cartridges for $1 each. You can guess which one I'll be keeping after the video. The worst condition cartridge here is still acceptable. For me, this is where the line would be drawn. Something I see very often are cartridges that had a tiny open slot in the middle, where some dummy at one point must have pressed it inwards. This usually tears the sticker, at which point the presentation takes a massive hit. Another commonality are Activision cartridges suffering from Actiplaque stains, basically stains underneath the label from the unfortunate choice of glue. It's a shame considering Activision games are largely accepted as the console's best. One thing I don't believe I've mentioned in the past is that Activision cartridges have plastic indentations, which makes stacking them super easy. They also have a much lesser chance of falling over, unlike Atari's cartridges that slip and slide all over the place. I've just noticed that CBS Electronics did the same with their cartridges too. Activision is still a huge name in the gaming world, but it's very unlikely that anyone who worked there in the 70s is still with the company. There was even a big leadership change in the 90s, which further complicates that connection. I will say they've been great at preserving their games ever since, so at least they have respect for the company's origins. I myself don't own many Activision cartridges anymore. At one point I sold the majority because I felt having Activision Anthology on PS2 was good enough. Honestly, I do stand by these means being good enough in regards to ownership, but it does cut out the simplicity of just grabbing a cartridge, throwing it in, and playing. That's one of the reasons I don't mind having loose cartridges anymore. There was a time when I only wanted to own these complete, but now Atari themselves have started selling them in just cardboard sleeves. I think by this point, we all realize it's the easiest to store them this way. Not to mention in the case of complete games, having to maintain those cardboard boxes. I used to keep my cartridges inside their box with plastic sleeves. These boxes were already delicate back then, so it just feels like the responsible thing for me to do for their age. But I did find that after enough time, it makes taking them out to play feel like such a hassle, actually discouraging me from using them. So what I do now with these boxes is that I still keep them in their plastic sleeves, but the cartridges are kept elsewhere in their own plastic sleeves. Am I an overly protective collector? Absolutely, and I don't think there's enough of us out there. Plastic sleeves aren't a one-size-fits-all for cartridges, unfortunately. My M-Network and Imagic cartridges don't fit, and Space Jockey is only slightly bigger than a usual cart, just enough to make it incompatible. But I did once get this little bag with another secondhand cartridge and it fits just fine. I've seen these for sale online too, and while they do fit more games, it's not going to be as snug. So here's a question I bet some will ask. Why own any cartridges when you already have a Harmony SD cart? Good question. Sometimes I ask myself the same. But one valid reason is that it's just a part of the intended experience. Insert your game and immediately start playing. There's also a burden of choice when you load an infinite library of games, being presented as a simple line of text as opposed to the intended process of plugging it in. One idea might be to instead make a digital album on your phone to refer with, and I can't argue with that, to be honest. If it works for you, go ahead. I myself prefer the intended process. Regarding controllers, I have a few options here. My Reckaton joystick from childhood, a Sega Genesis controller, which is probably also from childhood, and the Hyperkin Ranger. My preferred choice is always the Sega Genesis controller, but if you're using a Harmony cartridge, note that you have to hold B when powering up the system for some reason. The Reckaton joystick is still alright, probably not as good as Atari's modern 2600 controllers. While I did grow up using Atari joysticks, after getting a Sega Genesis, I always found them hard to go back to. This Hyperkin Ranger is a pseudo-analog stick and paddle controller. I got it when I didn't have a set of paddles, but now I have paddles. The Ranger's an interesting option, most suitable for the modern gamer. Its functionality is incredible, but I wouldn't say it does any one thing better than the alternatives. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about collecting. Now let's talk about playing. First, I'd like to discuss something very important about Atari 2600 games that I never hear modern audiences reference in retrospect: high scores. This was a huge part of the appeal to 2600 gaming. To many, the entire point of booting up a cartridge was to see how far you could get in its progressively advancing difficulty. Games quickly modernized after the 2600, and high scores fell out of relevance. The target became in-game objectives like completing a game of Super Mario Bros., as opposed to the Atari mindset of smashing every brick you can find. You don't really beat 2600 games, not for most of them anyways. They're more like a test of skill. How good are your reflexes, and how well do you understand the game? Did you know in Galaxian you can get a point increase in score by destroying the 3 descending ships before they return to the top? Now try it on Wave 5. Can your friend compete with that? Who's the better player? Let the high score decide. Okay, yeah, right. What friend is going to compete with you in 2600 games these days? And once you find that friend, your huge advantage on them won't make it very fun. But you can always compete with your own scores. In 2015, I got 7,170 points in a single-player game of Demon Attack. Wait, what do you mean I only got 5,040 in 2025? Alright, this time I'll surely beat it. You starting to get the appeal? That rush when you start closing in on a new high score. It's like being close second in a racing game during the final lap. Sure, it takes an investment of time to get to that point, especially when competing with a personal best. But hey, if you've reached your peak, just try another game. There'll always be plenty to choose from. While the focus of this video is Atari gaming, you can of course apply the same philosophy to where it all started, arcade games. I've recently started recording scores for arcade games myself, and I look forward to beating them in the future. Now I think it's time we start talking about those games. I could record the footage directly, I have the means to do it, but setting it up is a chore and adds a lot of input lag. I already suffered all that for my Activision library, so let's try something different this time. I'll record directly from the CRT itself. Definitely captures that old school feeling we crave so much. Sure, emulation is an option, but for the sake of this video, nah, I didn't want to do that. I often make these kinds of videos in alphabetical order, but today let's go in the order from worst to best. Let's just take off this console dust cover first. I don't know where I got this, but it's essential to keeping your Atari around. Otherwise, those crevices are a pain in the ass to clean through. Now keep in mind that I by no means have an excellent CRT. This one is on the lower end, as are most VHS combo units. And it's not new for me either, I've shown it in a few videos years ago. For me, this ended up being the practical choice. We don't have that much free space. It does what I need and it's the perfect size, so good enough for me. Starting off with Space Jockey. Alright, full admittance, this is not a classic. It was a recent curiosity pickup that I don't plan on keeping, but occasionally I do like to take home a 2600 game that seems interesting. In this case, I've heard Space Jockey was the basis for Air Raid, a bootleg cartridge and one of the most rare games of all time. A variety of them came in these weird handle cartridges, and to be honest, I kinda like them, but it doesn't leave much room for the label. What are we talking about? Oh, Space Jockey. Yeah, this one's pretty boring. I know there's a storyline which is meant to make it more interesting, but even then, you're just shooting whatever comes from the right of the screen. I did say these would be brief looks at these games. I'll say just enough to give you an idea of what it was and whether it'd be fun to try, and in the case of Space Jockey, well, it's not a recommendation. Asteroids. This is about as simple as a 2600 game can be while still maintaining an entertainment value. All you have to do is destroy the asteroids. They break into smaller chunks, which can become pretty overwhelming. You can press down at any time to respawn somewhere random on the screen, which is good for a quick getaway. Something important to note about 2600 games is that there are often numerous gameplay variations. In Asteroids' case, there are 66 of them. The difficulty notches are also there, which let you speed up the opposition or change their size. Depends on the game. This is great for replayability. Just be sure to write down your high scores accordingly. See here, this is the setup that I've gone with in a notepad. Oh, Asteroids. I could never give you up because of your awesome cartridge art. It's so much fun to browse through Atari games, even just to look at the imagery they used to sell it. I have heard this frustrated people at the time because of the false expectation it built. And yeah, that probably sucked if you were cashing out $30 for a game back when, can't argue with that. I was born with my dad's existing collection of 20-something games, so instead the art just sparked my imagination for what the game might look like. For me it was fun, imaginative, and mysterious. For everyone else, I guess it was more like a betrayal. Looking back on it now, yeah, we all know what to expect with Atari games, so this artwork is just artwork at this point. But it's still really cool. Atari had some great graphic designers back in the day. Alright, those last two games, not huge recommendations from me. They're kind of in my collection at this point just by happenstance. I like the opportunity they gave me to ramble, but nonetheless, for the remaining 20 games, these are timeless classics. Yars' Revenge. A truly iconic game in the 2600 library that Atari could never seem to let go, even though their attempts beyond a neat Game Boy Color version have always flopped. In the case of the 2600 original, the foundation for the game is truly excellent. Destroy the shield, touch the Kotile laser base, then fire your Zorlon cannon to hopefully line up with the Kotile and defeat it. There are two types of shields and, well, that's it actually. The game loops after the second screen. That, in my opinion, is the game's biggest flaw, and it's an absolute crime that Atari still hasn't made a successor to this game with more shield types. I don't actually play Yars' Revenge that often, but it radiates Atari 2600 energy. Not to mention all the marketing Atari threw at this one. It even includes a comic book. And check this out, an Atari catalog is included. The first page is, oh my god, it's the Frame Raider. Love the high quality renders for original game art in here. Wow, so much artillery in one spot. Everyone in this picture is about to die. Oh man, the cartridge organizers! I've seen these before, and people often charge way too much for them. Adventure. My copy had a bad label, so I replaced it with this, which is really just a mediocre print I made. Well, better than nothing, I guess. I first played this on the old Atari plug-and-play, which didn't give you nearly as much information as the manual does. I'd argue you can't really figure this game out without the manual. Like, for example, I never knew the dragons were individual characters that react differently to certain items. So basically in Adventure, you're trying to recover a stolen chalice, then return it to the Yellow Castle. It's basically a maze, and the way you traverse it depends on the items you're able to find. Like a bridge that lets you pass over obstructions. Lots of crazy antics in this one. There's a bat that can show up and steal your items, and those dragons can show up out of nowhere to trap you. It can be a little unfair at times. You might have to start over occasionally. For one of the first of its kind, Adventure is a very cool game, although it does wear thin on my patience sometimes. This game brings more attention to the elephant in the room. My CRT's alignment seems to be off, at least when playing Atari games. As this is a lower-end model, there aren't as many options related to tilt and centering. Actually, I don't think this TV has any. Well, it is what it is. Frogs and Flies. Oh look, an M-Network game. These are bizarre cartridge designs, I don't like them. But they do plug into your Atari real nice. Yo, mine came with a free M-Network decal offer. How can I get one now? Frogs and Flies, while playable in single player, is much better with a friend. You both play as frogs on a hot summer's evening. Catch as many flies as you can by jumping across the lily pad and deploying your tongue at the right moment. Whoever catches the most flies wins. The time of day changes as you play, and at the end you're serenaded by what I assume are the frogs croaking with glee. The thing about this game is, it's not terribly inviting for newcomers. The physics do take a moment to understand, and by that point, many today would probably just give up, so that is something to consider. Battlezone. This hit from the arcades had a very different execution on the 2600. Instead of vector graphics, you're overhead of the tank and now there's color? I always like the way that Battlezone looks here. Though the gameplay isn't terribly interesting, you really just spin around and shoot, with some of your targets being very difficult to hit. Activision's Robot Tank is often mentioned in comparison, and after revisiting Battlezone, yeah, that is the better game. Even still, I can enjoy sitting down and playing this every once in a while. Outlaw. This game practically demands to be played in multiplayer, unless you just want to shoot targets. In Outlaw, you get a selection of levels to choose from, where you battle head-to-head with player 2. Something in the way? Ricochet those shots for maximum efficiency. What makes this game special are the different settings. A cactus? A traveling wagon? In certain modes you can even destroy it. Or what about this giant, force field? There's hardly an explanation needed for this one. Anybody could pick up a controller and just start shooting. Simple, but lots of fun. Joust. I tried to find this locally for a while, but it was never in good shape. So I took to eBay and bought the cheapest copy that I could find, which was somehow a brand new sealed copy. There do seem to be a lot of them floating around. I bought it to play, so let's go ahead and check out what's inside. The cartridge has some white straggly things on it, kinda reminds me of my cat's hair. Then we have the manual, an Atari Club invitation, awesome, and this huge catalog poster. I'm gonna have to hang this up somewhere. That's cool. Huh, the manual itself is a poster. I'm glad I got to do this. That was an enjoyable unboxing. And here's the very first time it's ever been powered on. What an impressive feat for the 2600. You've probably seen the arcade original, and this isn't that far off. The goal is to defeat your competition by stomping on their heads, then collect the egg they'll drop, else shortly after they'll respawn. Wait too long and you'll get an extra unfriendly visitor. When a wave completes, the landscape can change, so don't make my mistake here. This is a fun one, although I do find myself preferring Nintendo's later balloon fight. Freeway. You know, people often trash on this game, but that's probably because they're not playing it with someone else. The idea is you both have to get your chicken across the road and as many times as you can. After the time limit, the player with the most chickens cross the road wins. If it were just a single setting here, yeah, this would be super repetitive. However, you get 8 of them, each with a unique challenge. It's always been fun to run through the 8 of them with a friend. Missile Command. Here's another highly faithful arcade port. I guess the task itself wasn't overly daunting. Missile Command is not a graphically intense game, so it translates perfectly to the 2600. Missiles and other enemy firepower descend from above, and you have to aim your cursor, then fire in an attempt to match their position. Sometimes after a wave, you get a weird series of sounds. Your attempts to save the world are unfortunately futile, as there's no avoiding the nuke once all your cities are destroyed. Miss Pac-Man. This exact port happens to be my first experience with Pac-Man as a whole. I didn't find out about that original 2600 port until more than a decade later. While I probably don't need to explain this game to you, I will for consistency. Eat all the dots, avoid the ghosts. Power pellets let you eat the ghosts, which will respawn shortly after in the middle. It revolutionized gaming and all that stuff. Any seasoned arcade player will tell you that Miss Pac-Man is the better game, and while that obviously remains true on the 2600, this is a rather competent Pac-Man just in general. Solar Fox. Many don't know that this was actually an arcade game, which is the same concept but feels very different to play by comparison. The sound effects of this game on 2600 give it an almost sinister feel. Whereas the arcade original ironically sounds cute and fluffy. In Solar Fox, you'll be collecting all the solar energy cells to clear a board, but beware of the 2 sentinels shooting your craft. Dodging their bombs can feel impossible at times, but luckily you can hold the fire button to speed up. This is a unique shooter take on Pac-Man that I've always thought is underrated. That isn't to say it deserves a second coming, I just think it was cool for its time. Time Warp. This one has a bizarre history. Time Warp is a bootleg that was sold in Canadian retail stores but manufactured in Taiwan. Said retail store being Zellers, by the way. These were released relatively late into the Atari's lifespan, cheap to make a quick buck. And from what I understand, my dad got our good old 2600 around the same time somewhere in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We had 3 of these games, I kept 2 of them. Time Warp is actually a game called Attack, which was released exclusively in Europe by Goliath. Considering this was a PAL region game, it wouldn't be compatible with my system. Time Warp, however, effectively brought this game to an audience that would likely never play it. I just think that's awesome. Let's check out the insert. Oh, it's just like a receipt. As a kid, this game scared me because it was so loud and aggressive. They probably didn't need to have the hit sound repeat 4 times. This game needed to come with a seizure warning. Close your eyes now to avoid the epileptic death screen. Even without epilepsy, that is just uncomfortable. Well, I've said everything I don't like about this game. The initial presentation of this one probably throws people off, but the actual gameplay is quite fun. Destroy each of the 5 incoming ships and they'll morph into a new wave. Do this 6 times to enter this maze place? The bootleg manual calls it the basement? That can't be right. If you enter the mouth of that thing, you get an extra life. It's probably meant to be some kind of refueling station. What really blows about this part is you can run through your entire set of lives. Touching any red surface destroys your ship, so it's a really panic-inducing moment of the game. Frankly, the entire experience is a bit nerve-wracking, but I somehow enjoy that chaos. This is a very intense Atari game that, if you can stomach, is one that I would recommend. Phoenix. An alien leader has been stealing your planet's resources, so now you must travel to its spaceship and destroy it. You'll first be attacked by Phoenix guards, which in their final form need to be shot from the middle as their wings regenerate. Press down at any time to use one of your limited shields in order to be temporarily invincible. Very useful during an encounter with the alien leader. This is a fun game, though I often forget about it because of how darn similar it is to Demon Attack. There are numerous games in the 2600 library that are directly compared with another, like Battlezone and Robot Tank, Megamania and Spider Fighter. Then you have Phoenix and Demon Attack. By comparison, Demon Attack is a lot simpler, but arguably more difficult. There's no spacecraft to destroy here, just a bunch of demons that split in 2 when you shoot them, then occasionally fly kamikaze style at the player. Interestingly, there's an Intellivision version of this game that does have a spacecraft to destroy, further connecting its influence. There's something very rock and roll about the presentation of Demon Attack, which gives it a more engaging feel than Phoenix. That cover art, damn. I would prefer giving these games a tie because I think they're both great, but Demon Attack gets the preference for a very small advantage. Vanguard. Wow, look at that artwork in the manual. Come to think of it, all my 2600 manuals seem to be in full color. Props to Atari. So this is another arcade game that I found is more recognized as a 2600 game. I don't believe Vanguard had as large of a print run as other arcade cabinets, which would probably give some reason to that. It looks quite a bit different on the 2600, which I actually prefer personally, but I'm probably just biased. This is another game I grew up with. Vanguard's quite advanced for a 2600 game. You start with 2 different waves of enemies, and nearby energy pods which make you invincible while Volton's theme from Flash Gordon plays. It's a horizontal shooter, then it's a vertical shooter. Beware of the striped zone with sudden traps to avoid, then dock on a chemless sky snake to ride it for a moment, but only thrice because the 4th ride will kill you. Then reach the Gond boss and just shoot him once and he blows right up.
But fellas, who destroys the Gond?
Luther destroys the Gond.
Vanguard is here, only from Atari.
Solaris. Solaris is probably the most complicated shooter on 2600, also a late addition to its library in 1986, thus the developers had already learned a great deal about the hardware. This game actually has an ending, but I've never reached it myself. I grew up without the manual, so I didn't really know what was going on. I would end up just trying for high scores instead. So long as you know to visit the Federation planet to refuel, you can continue going around and wreaking as much havoc as you like. And how about that? This game has a changing map screen with different planets and enemy fleets to encounter, many of which contributing to a unique ambiance. Not to mention, when a red alert is triggered, all hell breaks loose. This is one of the most immersive games on 2600, and I can't think of many other games, 2600 aside, that makes me feel like I'm truly exploring the galaxy. Galaxian. Now here's a 2600 port that people don't often think about. Unjustly so, but with such a frequently re-released classic like Galaxian, I suppose that's to be expected. If my memory serves me right, this 2600 port of Galaxian is the first video game that I ever played. It's simple. Shoot all the descending spaceships, but the order in which you do so gives you a greater set of points. It gets pretty difficult as you go on, and you can optionally change the game settings to start on higher waves if you like. Learning the patterns is essential to your success, though even without any of that in mind, you can always just play and have a good time. River Raid. As you may have seen earlier, my box is a 5200 copy of River Raid. The 2600 version has just enough room to fit in there as well. Though now that I take it out, this copy looks a lot uglier than I remember. My first experience with this game was on some Activision plug-and-play, and I later bought this second-hand copy. Man, I can't stand when the facing labels of Activision games get sun-damaged, discoloring it compared with the art. This is far from the worst case, but it's still noticeable. I've seen that you can get replacement labels fairly cheap by independent creators on Etsy, so I should probably do that for this and my adventure cartridges someday. River Raid is, in my opinion, one of the less repetitive games on the 2600, as it has a continuously changing landscape. No transitions either. You scroll forward infinitely while destroying as many boats, helicopters, and fuel tanks as possible for points. Just be sure that you don't yourself run out of fuel. So what does this all make me here, a terrorist? The manual implies that these are your enemies, but they won't do much to fight back. Much of this game's fun comes from narrowly avoiding death, often from the landscape which can shift in a moment's notice. Keep that all in mind and go for the jackpot. Laser Volley. This is my other bootleg Zeller's cartridge. It's just laser gates by a magic. Immediately when you start this game, you can recognize that it looks much different from other shooters. That's how you know you're in for a good time. I seem to be traveling through some kind of cavern, but it's actually a computer, and the mission is to destroy a bunch of detonators. Before you reach one, you'll travel past intimidating laser gates, destroy some nasty virus creatures, and slip through dense pack columns. When a detonator is found, destroy it to essentially move on to the game's second wave. The overall speed then increases, enemies become more frantic, and the laser gates become greater in numbers or width. While it does get a bit repetitive, as you're generally playing the same scenes over and over, they do seem to be randomly selected, making each adventure feel unique. The art used for these Zeller's bootlegs must have been selected at random. There are no jumbo jets or helicopters here. I really wonder what these were from. A few have been sourced, but I don't believe any of the ones that I owned have yet. They're probably not original pieces, as some others have been recognized as stolen artwork. Wasn't difficult to find out where Radar's art came from. Megamania! Wave by wave, you'll be eliminating the hordes of rogue knickknacks in space, apparently. I prefer to think of them as enemy ships. While optional, the main mode of this game gives the player guided missiles, so you have a little more room for error than usual. Don't delay now, as you're running out of energy the whole time. Defeat all your enemies, then automatically refuel before the next wave. The enemy patterns can be unpredictable at times, making some of those later waves mind-bendingly difficult. With enough practice you can get the hang of it though. See, in this run, I got a score of 119,000, which is almost my personal best. Here's a fun fact, this game was largely inspired by the arcade game Astro Blaster. It only takes a few seconds to see that similarity. Wow, look at this manual! That sucks! Activision, the masters of presentation, but not for the manual. You already bought the game, we don't need to impress you. Frogger. Well, the last 10 games on this list were space shooters. What makes Frogger so different? I mean, let's think about it. There's a naturally progressive difficulty, beautiful vibrant colors, and full freedom of the board? What a generous series of offerings! In case you don't know Frogger, you just need to get 5 frogs to the top of the screen, while avoiding all the dangers in between. Try your best to pick up the lady frog on your way for extra points. There are so many factors involved for points here that the next time you play, you can start optimizing your route for the best score. This 2600 port of Frogger is one of the system's best in my opinion. The gameplay loop of the original has been presented flawlessly. Ooh, look at all those wacky color palettes. Always love to see this on the 2600. It's a sort of game-ending screensaver that certain games will have, which they've included in order to keep your TV from suffering burn-in. So trippy. I remember deliberately watching this as a kid, thinking how cool it would be to play the game like this. And that's my collection of 2600 games. There are absolutely more games beyond this library that I enjoy, but not enough where I feel like I need to have them. Most of those being the more expensive ones anyways, and it's just hard to accept such high prices for old Atari games when they're usually sold for $1. I wouldn't say any Atari game in all honesty is worth paying more than $15 for, beyond its rarity status. I'm gonna be making an extension of this video at some point in the future, regarding good games outside of my collection. Could be my next video, could be 5 videos from now, haven't really decided yet. I would like to say this collection's permanent, but I have said similar things in past videos only to change things up regardless. There is still one game I've been looking for in good condition, which is Enduro by Activision. It's another classic that I used to have and would prefer owning a physical cartridge of. Either way, it's safe to say that these are the games that mean the most to me. Everything I've said about these games is of course individual preference, and I can't expect anyone to relate one-to-one, which would no doubt be the same if I went to check out your 2600 collection. I might not care for all of those games, but appreciate what they mean to you. For 2600 gaming in the modern day, of course there's emulation. Blech! If you don't have a CRT television, I would suggest looking into the 2600 Plus. It's an Atari licensed system, though much like Activision today, consider that this is not the same Atari as it was. We've all mutually given them the side eye for questionable decisions years ago, but during the last few they seem to have repaired their image to some extent. While it is very cool to have a modern HDMI solution, I've heard it takes a while to actually get into your game from a boot up. Kinda kills that quick and easy nature of these games to some extent, but if you don't have all the tedious old school setups, I imagine it's still a worthy alternative. Great for preservation's sake too. I'm glad Atari has provided these for the modern or returning audiences of 2600 gamers. It's been years since I made a retro console video like this. What changed? Honestly, the desire never left, I just ran out of hardware to discuss. Back in the late 2010s, I could pick up something random at a fairly reasonable price to cover here. But that's changed, the retro scene has exploded. Probably some amount of digital overload is responsible for that. At this point in my life, it would be irresponsible to drop hundreds on an old console when we've got much greater priorities to attend to. Still, I like making these videos and do have a couple remaining subjects. Maybe in the future I can find similar things to talk about, but it all depends on what I find. Nonetheless, that's all you're going to hear from me today, so I hope you enjoyed this Atari 2600 retrospective, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.
Yeah!